Hello.
Hey.
My name is Alex.
And I'm Val.
And we're here for the second episode of season 4.
We just watched it.
It's called No Show.
And we took some notes.
Yeah, we have an episode written by David Chase and Terrence Winter, directed by John Patterson, all-star team.
And we liked it.
We did like it.
So we can talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, we typically like them and we typically talk about them, so there's nothing too remarkable there.
Perfect.
But I do think it's an amazing episode, though, and I think there's a lot going on. I think there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. There's like a couple things that surprised me in this episode, and then there are, I think, like a couple like really deep threads throughout. So
Yeah.
just plot wise, like and we were briefly talking about this before we watched the episode, like how early this reveal to Adriana that Danielle/Deborah was part of the FBI.
Yeah.
Because we just got introduced to that the last episode of season 3.
Yeah.
Right?
Which I think is part of the reason why it feels like it goes on for so much longer than it actually has. Whenever I reflect on that storyline, I'm always shocked when I re-see the show how quickly it actually moves to this next step.
Yeah.
I always feel like there's an entire season where they're becoming friends, and yet it's actually only really 2 episodes.
Yeah. Well, and then for those of you who know where this storyline goes, that's a long time until we get, kind of the impact of this storyline. Like, I always thought it was a little bit more balanced. I don't know, like that it fell somewhere in the middle somewhere, but really, like, until late season 5, we don't really have resolution on this. No spoilers. But.
Right, yeah. It's interesting, too, because, like, you can imagine that if you were watching the show as it came out, obviously you have the impact of the time that happened between season 3 and season 4, which would stretch it out. But even without that, it still feels like that storyline is developing for a lot longer than it actually is.
Yeah, well, I guess it's funny. Like, we were talking about the passage of time between season 3 and season 4 last episode.
Yeah.
And, I think part of me also, like, you kind of, how do I say it? Like, you feel the time that's passed in that relationship. Like, you see how intimate they've become with each other. Oh, I guess it's 4 months. Oh, that clarifies some weird stuff.
Yeah.
Remember they said that she's put in 4 months of
That's
work
right.
on it.
Good point. Wow.
So now I'm really messed up on the timeline of how much has passed.
Actually, when that gets back to our question of it being September and what does that mean, that actually does kind of raise some questions.
Yeah.
That is surprising.
I guess it's anyways.
Well, if you have any theories about how that works, let us know, but that may actually just be a continuity error.
I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, I guess actually it also means that we have to imagine that this is actually 2001. Based on that, that the Twin Towers actually like just fell.
Who knows?
Which there's mixed messages. There is definitely some weirdness in terms of how they're presenting the time. But that is okay.
Anyways, sorry, that just popped into my mind. But yeah, like we don't need a lot to understand how deeply Adriana feels connected to Danielle. Right? Yeah. It's interesting.
She's also like desperate for a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for connection with somebody who she can talk about, but who's also outside of the mob family and the mob world that she feels that she can relate to.
Yeah, well, she doesn't have the other like mob wives like the rest of them do, right? Like, there's no one who's really kind of like Christopher's generation even.
No. She really is all on her own. She has Cosette, the dog.
She has her puppy.
Yeah.
Anyways, that just kind of struck me in this episode. And I love Adriana as a character, so I think I always like feel very sad for her in this episode.
Yeah. And that is definitely like a pretty major plot movement that happens right now. And that's interesting, like the fact that this is written by David Chase and Terrence Winter. Like, David Chase typically comes on at rather pivotal moments of the show. And so I do think like there's a lot of development that happens here, and we are moving to some new things.
I think this episode is super pivotal.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a lot of threats that have been hanging around Tony and his associates, but now like actually that's like a manifestation of one of those threats. Like, that is moving to the next kind of step.
Yeah.
Even though the threat in some ways was neutralized.
Yeah.
Like that was a very effective operation, and that it was actually shut down through Christopher being a horny jerk.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, now that Adriana is like brought into the FBI, we have to see that as like an escalated threat.
Yeah. Well, I love how these guys play with us too. I mean, like, this could have happened at the end of this season.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because they just introduced Danielle, right?
Yeah.
Like,
no, when you talk about form,
right?
it's like...
It's so surprising, and I love it.
Unbelievable.
And, you know, like, it really makes you then second guess, like, the trajectory of this season.
Yeah, and to introduce her in the season finale, and then to resolve it in episode 2, like, my God. Like, now not only are we playing with the form within a season, but we're actually, like, overlapping.
I know,
you have, like, a thread
really
that's going over season 3 and season 4 in a very unexpected way.
Yeah.
And I think they do it really well. Like, I think it's really effective, and it's amazing.
Sorry, I just bumped our table.
It's okay. It happens.
Yeah, no, anyways, I just had to kind of start with that because it was really sticking with me.
Yeah.
But, yeah, how do you want to do this one?
Well, there's something that I wanted to talk about that I picked up on in this episode. And I think that it's a thread that really goes through the whole episode. And I think is definitely something deliberate. So, very early on, actually, in the episode, when we have Meadow in the kitchen and she's talking to Tony and Carmela, she gets a call right after Carmela basically takes her on. She says, you know, I was basically, you know, like unpacking the great canon of literature.
Right.
And then Carmela says, oh, I saw you reading Mary Higgins Clark.
Yeah, that's actually after the first phone call that happens.
Okay, well, so there's multiple phone calls.
Yeah,
but the one that actually I think that kind of caught my attention is that right after that, where she's kind of misrepresenting what she's been doing and then kind of like manipulating Carmela in a way, she gets a call. And her statement is, come on, he's so totally duplicitous. Which I thought was really interesting after she's clearly being duplicitous about what she's doing.
Yeah.
And even though she is grieving over Jackie Jr., at the same time, she's clearly manipulating the situation to kind of like lounge around and just kind of like not do anything. Like there is an aspect outside of just her grieving.
Melfi kind of identifies that pretty clearly in her session with Tony.
Well, Melfi kind of takes her side to an extent in that she says it must be really hard and like he did die and she does kind of go on that side, but then she also does acknowledge to some extent she could be manipulating the situation. Yeah. Now, what's really interesting is that I kind of took note of that as this theme of duplicity, and then that theme just came up so much in this episode. Like everywhere.
Yeah.
Every character is being duplicitous.
Yeah.
And I thought that this episode is really kind of defined by that duplicity that all the characters are taking part in. So, I mean, the examples are actually kind of like comically numerous. I couldn't even really believe it.
Yeah.
So they do establish it early on. Obviously, the great duplicity that happens in this episode and that we build up to is between Danielle and Adriana.
Yeah.
So we have that very obvious one. But we have some interesting things happening in the early scene, actually, at the Crazy Horse, where Adriana reveals, you know, these very intimate secrets of hers. And, you know, we have lines like Danielle saying to her, sometimes it helps to talk, huh? You know, so like immediate duplicity, they're actually on multiple levels. Like she wants her to talk about the mob business. So she's actually kind of manipulating the situation so that she will talk about other things.
Yeah.
And that's even a surprising situation because Danielle brings up, you know, this guy that she used to be her fuck buddy and he always got a beeper, and she thought he was connected. Like, that's like a power move.
Yeah.
And then actually, Adriana
Abe kind of shrugs it off,
dips under the bar, comes over to share something with her. I want to share something with you. So we obviously expect that this is going to be about the mob,
and so
but
does
it's
Danielle.
not.
Yeah.
And she's taken off guard. But then, you know, like we see that duplicity of her actually trying to bring the focus back.
Yeah. I think that scene, I know you want to go on too, so I don't want to take it too far.
Yeah.
But I think that moment where she does come under the bar, like, I think that's pretty symbolic of her, like, kind of unknowingly, that's the point where she, like, Danielle really got her, right?
Yeah.
Like, she shared this intimate secret, which made them have that extra level of intimacy. She saw, like, you know, give little Polly the cocaine.
Yeah.
Like, that was actually probably where Adriana got caught, right? Like, because that let Danielle get that much closer. And so her, like, coming to the same side of the bar was really, like, her coming to that side in some ways.
It's getting rid of that separation.
Yeah.
Interestingly, too, when she also goes under the bar, the shot changes. We can see that there's these eyes
as
artwork
we see them a bit before.
On the back of the wall, but they're kind of blocked by the two characters. When Aid actually comes under the bar, now the shot has both eyes in focus.
Right.
And we can see one kind of associated with both characters.
Yeah.
So we see one behind Danielle, one behind Aid. So even as she shares this, like, incredibly intimate secret, we have these two eyes on the wall that are kind of peering at us.
Yeah.
Which also relates to the last scene of the last episode with, you know, the Andrew Jackson eye
right,
on the $20 bill.
Yeah.
That they actually focus on. So there's this thing that's watching, and even in this supposed safe space of the Crazy Horse, the FBI actually successfully infiltrated and is watching.
But infiltrated, like, not the right shit. Like,
right.
You know, like, and that's kind of, I think, one of the tragic things about this is, like, for Aid, it is this really true moment, right? And for Danielle, it's just her seeking information.
Yeah.
And, you know, she even, like, she gets this hug from her, you know, she gets this offer of the OBGYN in New York or whatever, or in the city. But what hurts Aid the most, you know, like she throws up, but it's like, is your name really Danielle? Or she's like, I told you so much shit that has nothing to do with this, right?
Totally.
And so for her, it is just this breach of confidence or like, you know, like the fact that they really delved into her personal life in order
breach of intimacy
to get this information on her fiance who does his own shit. Like, it's not, you know, like, Aid has nothing to do with that. She's grappling with her own stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. They even play actually with that, like, infiltration or whatever, or like the FBI there with the eye. Later on, like in the back room when Chris actually
when he gets there,
there's another eye behind him. Even when Chris is saying lines like, "There's something wrong with that broad," and there's an eye right behind him, kind of like looking down.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting scene.
Well, because like, it's linked to the bracelet too. Like, I don't like. Yeah. Because in that scene, she's putting on the bracelet. Yeah.
That's when she gets the Harry Winston.
And then later we see Danielle/Deborah focusing on the bracelet when she's in the office.
Which is interestingly, like, in that scene too, she gets the Harry Winston, which is the same thing that Tony gave to Carmela earlier in the show. But she gets it at a time where Chris is actively discussing Carmela won't be First Lady forever. Like, there's actually, like, a connection there between those two pairs. Like, Chris is now emulating Tony's actions in terms of bringing Adriana in, which is, like, at the worst possible time because there is this this threatening presence.
Well, and she's engaged. Like, you know, he comes in and he's like, you know, he seems like excited about something, and he's like, I got some good news or something. He says something, and she's like, what? Tell me. Yeah. You know? And so again, it's this, like, intimacy in relationships that is dangerous for people. Yeah. And that's kind of all that Adriana's got. Yeah. Which just makes me sad.
And Cosette. She has Cosette.
I know.
Yeah.
Stop saying that.
So we have, you know, I'm going to keep going because there truly is just so much.
Totally.
So another one, you know, Janice with Ralphie now and the way that she kind of hides that. Tony comes in, immediately finds out, as, you know, he says faces of death on the video. And then she's actually duplicitous immediately after too, in terms of, like, reframing, which I think is kind of the commonality between how a lot of these characters deal with putting out false information to get what they want. They reframe things, which is something that we see in the show going all the way back to, like, college. Yeah. With Tony and Meadow, you know, like, as soon as Tony is out of his comfort zone, he'll kind of, like, reframe something against Meadow by, like, attacking her. Yeah. Or, like, refocusing on something that she did. Yeah. Which I'll come back to later because there's kind of a parallel to that later on in the episode. But even the way that Janice responds to Faces of Death is she says it's research on her Christian release. Right. And, you know, oh, yeah, we were going to release with Sony. Now we're looking more at an independent music label. Yeah. That's clearly duplicitous and outright incorrect.
Just, like, a total lie. Yeah. But then, of course, like, Tony finds that shoe. I love how he holds the shoe. Yeah. And he just has to look at her, and then she totally shifts, right? Yeah. Like, so she's, like, lying all the way, but she knows she can't lie her way out of this one with Ralphie. Like, he's standing
and then
there
she's honest, and then she says,
yeah, but her face is really amazing when she like she's like, you know, basically like, I don't owe you anything. Like, I don't need to.
Those Turturros know how to act.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to keep going?
Yeah, go. Keep
so
going.
many. So another one,
Patsy.
little. Yeah, well, we have Patsy. Even before that, there's a tiny throwaway line where little Polly says Tony made a killing on those Frelinghausen properties. I'm going to screw up the name. Sorry, New Jersey residents. But we were talking about that in the last episode where Tony buys from Junior his properties on Frelinghausen. Right. And he's actually duplicitous in the way that he presents that information, saying that it's a way to give him money for his legal fees, when he actually has inside information from Zellman about their value. Yeah. Already, he's made a killing on that, You know, so yeah, that's an interesting reference to duplicity that happened very recently from Tony.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after that, then we have this fiber optic cable situation between Patsy and Christopher. And I found that really interesting because I actually had a bit of a different interpretation of it this time than I've had in previous times. Or maybe something is just very clear to me now that maybe wasn't on original viewings. And that's that Patsy is clearly manipulating Christopher in that scene.
Yeah.
I think I used to see it as like, you know, they're kind of fighting or whatever, but then they kind of have this like tacit understanding that there's money to be made and they do it. But it's different really. Like Patsy is feeling marginalized, as Silvio says, about being passed over.
I like that Silvio uses the word marginalized.
Yeah. And Tony says, what does that even mean? Which is ironic and
it's great.
Interesting. But for Patsy to take that situation, he sees the fiber optic cable. He's actually manipulating Christopher to get him in trouble because he recognizes the responsibility that Christopher has now. And I think he does actually see the bigger picture. Like Tony keeps on saying to Christopher, like, see the bigger picture, use your head. And then Christopher keeps on, like, passing that on to other characters like Adriana throughout the episode. But he's lacking that skill. And he so clearly gets manipulated. And I think that Patsy, with that look that he gives him, is duplicitous. He wants Christopher to take heat for stealing this stuff. And so he actually creates that situation.
And maybe Silvio sees even the bigger picture.
It's interesting.
Above that.
Well, we can talk about that because that's another example of duplicity.
Yeah.
Because Silvio is fascinating. He's actually been a rather undeveloped character up until this point. But the very last scene, basically, that we have, well, not the very last, but one of the last, is Sil coming over to Tony's. And he's actually doing exactly like what we've been talking about reframing the argument and like casting aspersion on others. So he kind of does it to Tony. He says, what, you mad at me now? And he says, you hanging this on me? Like he's threatening him to pin it on him directly. And it's really interesting because Silvio goes to Patsy Parisi, or Patsy comes to him, I guess, but he's giving him the okay to steal the tiles. So that really is his plan. And then when he's confronted on it by Tony, like he's actually very kind of astute in his leadership abilities to kind of like not take the fall for it, not end up being blamed, but then also kind of like manipulate so that he's not, no,
it is interesting.
So that's, you know, yet another example that comes through. And, you know, even more, a really fascinating one that I thought was Meadow actually using therapy as kind of a tool over Tony. So, you know, like there's a couple exchanges, but one thing that really came up for me in this episode is actually parallels between Meadow and Tony, particularly from season 1, Tony becoming depressed. So there's some things that happen in this episode that are happening to Meadow that I find are very reflective of what was happening to Tony in season 1.
Lying in bed, being
lounging
out by
around
the pool.
in bed. Actually, the reference to time quite a bit, like you know, she
Tony,
wakes up,
Tony,
she's saying, I don't want
watch.
onions in the morning. Carmel says it's 2 p.m. There's clocks in the kitchen that show us the time all the time to show us how late it is. Meadow gets woken up. There's a clear view of the clock saying 11:50 and then 11:51. And I think that it's a really interesting connection from her to Tony, like as a depressed person, but also reflective of possibly Meadow following a path that's similar to Tony. And I think that that's one of the core ideas of this episode too, is like, who will Meadow be? She's at a crisis point. She's at a potential like fork in the road. And I think that as she lounges around in bed and kind of like doesn't take responsibility for things and is duplicitous and casts blame on other people and kind of manipulates her way to get what she wants, there is like a possibility of her becoming her father and actually being brought closer to home. And that's an interesting thing because even that's referenced in the episode. You know, like Melfi and Tony are talking
She's
about.
Like, she wants to be closer.
That's
home.
interesting. It actually sounds like she wants to be home. And Tony says, that's true. It's surprising. But that's actually almost the problem in Soprano world. And that's what we can see as objective viewers is that Meadow needs to get as far away as possible. You know, kind of like Carmela is told when she goes to therapy. And yet Meadow coming home is actually kind of like a negative thing.
Totally.
So, you know, I think there's an aspect of that, though, you know, like when she goes to see Wendy Cobbler, the psychiatrist, and she's getting information like college degree is a nice thing, but not at the sake of your emotional well-being. She's already been kind of like using these lines before.
Yeah, she keeps being like, that's exactly what I said.
That's exactly what I said. But then she actually like takes things from the therapy and then like weaponizes them. you should know Dr. Cobbler said I should be on Prozac. And that really hits them.
Yep.
You know, she completely lures in Carmela and gets her hook, line, and sinker when she's saying, like, I get that you don't want me to be here.
And Carmela's like, that's not what I said.
Carmela says, you think that I don't want you to be here? And, like, that kills her.
Yeah.
So, like, she's weaponizing all these things against other people to get what she wants. Like, very strong sense of duplicity.
Yeah. But then part of me, maybe we can come back to it.
Yeah.
But part of me is like, maybe that was a good idea for Meadow.
To go away?
Yeah.
I absolutely think it's a good idea.
And so, like, she's being, like, kind of a brat. Well, no, she's being a total brat. And she is being manipulative, for sure. I don't know for me, like, if I go as far as duplicitous for Meadow.
Manipulative, at a minimum.
Definitely, anyways. But, like, what would have happened if she had gone to Europe? And why didn't she?
Yeah. It's a great question.
Because she really did seem to believe in what she was saying, and she seemed to, like, she was really devastated when Tony had said, like, oh, you can, like, go. Yeah. And then he changed his mind. She's like, but you said I could go.
Yeah.
You know? And he says your mother doesn't want it, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's not willing to take the heat for that. But yeah, I don't really know why she stays. She didn't take some morality course.
Yeah, morality, self, and society.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, that signature that she, she sends to, like, she is locking in her fate to an extent. Like, she has chosen a path there. And she is staying closer to home.
Yeah.
And I would argue, and I believe, that the correct path was actually to get as far away as possible.
Yeah, maybe
I think
go to the
that
University of Barcelona. That's what I would do.
Yeah, that does sound cool.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do that right now.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
But it is, like, an interesting examination that she's having, but I think that, like, what Carmela and Tony think about and what they want for her is not necessarily the best thing. In fact, it might actually be the worst thing.
Well, and actually, like, even though Wendy Cobbler's kind of like a
shitty psychiatrist.
I don't know. Like, she's like, sometimes she's, I think, good, and then sometimes she's really bad. She's weird. Like, really bad. But she does say a few things that stand out. Like, she's like, I think your parents need to evaluate why they want you they're so dedicated to you getting your degree.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think, like, that does hold a lot of meaning for Tony and Carmela. Right? And it, like, means something. Like, for them, in some ways, it does mean her getting away from that life and stuff like that, and, like, forging her own, like, not relying on a man and whatever, right? Like, it does hold a lot of significance for them, but at the same time, like, it's not that that's going to give Meadow her independence and, freedom from the family.
Yeah.
It might be something different, but they like, hold a lot into that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, even, like, Carmela and Tony's relationship to the therapist. Like, when they're talking about Europe, and the response is like, well, like, what's over there? And they're kind of, like, questioning what the value of it could be. And then Carmela's really pushing to get the therapist as a tool to make Meadow stay. So they don't even see the therapist as, like, somebody who could be examining this issue on both sides and helping Meadow to uncover what she needs. They see it as a tool to get what they want, which is interesting and clearly not the point of Meadow's therapy. But I think that's problematic. And when you were talking about, like, unpacking what their relationship is to Meadow's education and why they feel like they need that, I think that's relevant because they clearly haven't fleshed out those ideas. They just want what they want.
Well, and Carmela talks about it kind of sarcastically, right? When they're like, what's over there? She's like, experience, real life, art.
And then
a
Tony
movie in Denmark. Like,
Tony
it's so disparaging.
I knew this art was going to be a problem, all this art talk. So dangerous.
So, I mean, such a good David Chase joke,
Yeah.
Because I think it's great.
It's interesting, too, like, again, Meadow as a reflection of Tony. And I think that it's pretty strong here. But she has a really interesting relationship to being from a mafia family. There's some, like, small things that happen in her session that I thought were really fascinating. Like, the Dr. Cobbler says, you mentioned that Jackie's dad was in the mafia. Jack's dad. And then Meadow says there's no such thing as the mafia. He was a loan shark.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because we've actually gotten, like, the reference that she actually did pass on that information.
Yeah.
And so there is this, like, identity crisis for Meadow of, like, is she a part of this family or is she not? Are her values those of the mafia? Are they not? And I think they're all kind of like thrown up in the air, and she's dealing with both of them. Yeah. She wants to protect her family, like we've seen at Jackie's funeral. I can't believe you'd talk about this in front of an outsider. It's like this like mixed bag of feelings about how you act and like what her principles are. And I think that she's just kind of sorting it out. And the ultimate question is, where will she land?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting how Melfi also pegs Meadow as regressing.
Yeah.
Right? In that session that she has with Tony. Because, I mean, it reminds me of when Janice is like, my therapist says I'm regressing.
Yeah.
In a very proud way. But I don't know. Like, I think like Meadow in her own 19-year-old way is going through a period of like pretty pivotal development, right?
Definitely.
Like, so I think that's a pretty silly accusation. Although I talked about her like in last season's finale, you know, kind of being a drunk baby, and they talk about that in the session with the therapist, who's like, as long as you weren't purposely purging or whatever. But like I don't see her as regressing. I see her like over the past season as regression, like moving home and being with Jackie, and like it takes away kind of the independence that she was trying to find. It kind of brought her back, and now she's kind of like reasserting herself and trying to do that in a babyish 19-year-old way, for sure. But I don't know, I think Melfi kind of has it wrong, that like, you know, that, you know, this thing about her being close to home as a positive thing, obviously. But I also, I don't think she's regressing. Yeah,
and I actually think she's evolving.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's interesting because they leave season 3 with her running across traffic, leaving the family, you know, and like she is kind of like escaping that orbit, which we'll reference to our discussions on this series finale, perhaps. But I do think that like that is the ultimate question, and she's working through that right now. Like she has made some steps to assert herself and move outside of the orbit, and there's a constant draw bringing her back.
No, I like when Carmela says like, just getting what you want is for babies, not for adults, right? Whereas,
but that's like, what Tony is.
Of course, and Carmela.
Yeah.
You know, that's for babies.
Yeah.
We like to talk about babies on this show.
There's also, it's interesting actually, during that like sit down that they have, I thought there was actually like a couple instances in this episode where there's like a kind of, they kind of go back to things that I talked a lot about in season 1 and in season 2 of like a color scheme, of like whites and blacks, and using colors in a kind of like purposeful way.
Yeah.
So even in that, like Tony and Carm on both sides are kind of wearing like this like light, kind of like white and black kind of colors, and Meadow is in between, actually, like with a very distinctly like blue top that really kind of like stands out. And there's actually like a lot of examples in this episode. The first shot that we have, actually, the like dark phone that gets the call that brings Danielle in from Aid.
There's a lot of phones.
There's a lot of phones, which we've talked a lot about, especially in season 1, like white and black phones. Furio, when he comes, like wearing all black. Tony putting on all black in an early scene.
Then there's this scene like right before Meadow goes to therapy. Tony and Carmela are like talking kind of like in their closet. And they're talking about like sending Meadow to therapy.
Yeah,
and, like,
the yellow.
And they're both wearing this yellow, and then Meadow's wearing that same yellow when she goes to the session with the therapist. I don't know what it means, but she also, I don't know.
Yeah.
She wears blue a lot in the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about colors in a long time.
I know we haven't, but I really feel like they kind of got back to it in this episode.
Totally. No, it was really noticeable. It was really heavy.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah, I agree.
The other thing, just quickly, that just while we're still talking about Meadow, kind of, even though we've jumped ahead, I thought it was interesting how when she was at the therapist's office that she talks about how she was revolted by the saccharine Italian ballads.
Yeah.
But yet she wants to go to Europe, and Europe does hold this symbol. I mean, later we see Carmela. Well, Carmela had planned a trip to Europe prior. We didn't see her go on that trip. We see this like call for Meadow to go to Europe. We see Carmela does later go to Europe in future episodes.
Yeah.
And so it is this kind of like there's something about Europe that, and Tony's like, maybe she'll meet a real Italian guy, right? And I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but like linked in with like Carmela's kind of obsession with Furio.
Yeah.
And again, these things that they mentioned, like what does Europe have? Like what's over there?
Yeah.
And I think it is this kind of like positive symbol. I think it's this kind of like anti-American in some ways beacon, where none of these characters could ever really actually be there, I don't think. But it is this kind of place that calls them. It's like this, you know, golden age, like, you know, like, I don't know, I think about The Godfather. I think about like, or The Godfather 2, rather. And looking back on those scenes of like, you know, the old mafia in Italy, right? And then compared to the, you know, compare it to this present day mafia and the Sopranos. It holds kind of this like golden tone to it in some way. And characters are trying to get back there, but it's never possible to get back.
Yeah.
Anyways.
No, definitely.
The restorative nature of travel.
Yeah, the restorative nature. So going on with Meadow, actually, the really big moment in the episode is where there's this like explosion from Tony after she calls him Mr. Mob Boss. And that actually for me is like, interestingly, like another example of kind of like manipulation to serve one's end. So, you know, like after she's challenged by Tony in that way, even if it is like kind of passive aggressive, he goes on this diatribe about, you know, like protecting Jackie. I did everything I could to protect that kid. And then Meadow talks about pussyfooting around this, talking about the mob, which is something that happened, right? That's actually that college moment where Tony kind of like flips it against Meadow and they don't have the conversation. And they never really do.
Yeah, and I think he says something really
it.
Similar, like, is there something you want to ask me?
Yeah.
Or is there something you want to tell me? Like, there's some similar language there. I should have thought about that a little more. But
yeah. And so anyway, I thought that it was really interesting that you have this situation, you know, where like Tony's talking about, you know, he did everything to protect the kid. He's actually the one pussyfooting around the topic.
Yeah. She says, you can't even be honest for 3 seconds. And he's like, try me.
Yeah.
But like, she is trying him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Meadow talks about pussyfooting around this topic of being a mob family, and then Tony kind of explodes and then says, that's not what I asked you. You know, but what he asked her was actually taking away her question and talking about like, do you not think it's about Jackie now and him protecting Jackie? So that's exactly what he's doing. He's completely pussyfooting around the topic and he refuses to talk about it. And so he's manipulating that situation to not have that conversation.
Yeah, no, like that scene. I mean, that's such an incredible scene. The part of it where she bursts into tears when he says, like, when she's like, "But you said I could go."
Yeah.
Like the look on his face, like you can see that really impacts him, and then we see his response is this like build up of anger, right?
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate that Tony couldn't be more guided by those kind of like moments of real emotion that he faces, and like actually deal with Meadow as a person who, and like acknowledge the way that he hurts her or the way that his life hurts her. He can't do that. Yeah. You know, like he always comes back to like, I do this to provide for this family. Like he always comes back to that, but he really can't acknowledge the way that he hurts her. Yeah. And he can't acknowledge his role in Jackie's death. Like he wants to, like he did care about Jackie. Yeah. Right? Like I think very deeply. And he did care about, you know, like treating him like a son and, you know, because of his relationship with Jackie Sr. Yeah. But that's all he can kind of grapple with. Like he can't see.
Well, and he's an incredible actor. Like, and I don't mean James Gandolfini. I mean like Tony. Because he accesses these truths for himself, and then he spins things around that. Because he did actually care about Jackie. Yeah. But then that's what he kind of like diverts the attention towards.
There's some overlap too, and I'm still struggling to put my finger on it, but like there's an overlap for me between that scene with Meadow and Tony and Carmela, and then the scene with Adriana at the FBI office. Like, they both, like, there's these events that happen. They're like kind of feeling attacked or exposed in some way, And they keep bringing it back to these like really personal ways in which this is impacting them. But the people around them are talking kind of like they're talking about these issues with the mob. And it's like, no, like this is how it's impacting me emotionally, or this is how you like this is how our relationship is being impacted. And yeah, like the mob has some role in this, but like everyone else is kind of like focusing on that, or like on Jackie, or on the cocaine at the club, where they're trying to really express like some true emotion, just like feeling unsupported, or feeling abandoned, or feeling like I said, like when Meadows like, but you said I could go, like feeling betrayed, or acknowledging that people have been duplicitous towards them, right? So there was some overlap, and they come back to back.
There's multiple overlaps too. I mean, like even like one of the first scenes, like there's actually a connection between Danielle, Adriana, and Meadow,
right?
Because like after that phone call, we have Danielle walking through the door like wearing underwear. We have Adriana wearing her underwear. They're both talking on the phone, and then the edit that they choose is immediately to Meadow wearing like her swim top, a bathing suit. But yeah, like, I mean, we know how they like to use edits in the show. Like, there's a connection point there, and yeah, like I think that like those situations, like they are drawing some parallels between what Adriana is going through towards Danielle in this episode and Meadow. Yeah, there is a commonality between those characters. Yeah,
one of the other. Do you want to move on to more duplicitousness? Duplicity?
Duplicity? I mean, there's more from Janice even.
I was gonna talk about Ralphie actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah, linked.
And then and it is linked. One of the more like kind of like under. There's that really weird scene where Ralphie and Vito are playing basketball. Okay. And Ralphie's wearing this like pink shirt, and he has like a shirt around his waist. It's like very weird. And Vito is wearing this.
He's like, a style conscious man. Are you threatened by that?
Are you threatened by his style? I think I am threatened by Ralphie's style. It's very weird. But he basically comes out and says to Vito that he sees being with Janice. Like, they talk about, like, her hair, and they talk about her boobs. Yeah. But then he, like, basically sees it as a career move. Yeah. He's like, it doesn't hurt my career. Yeah. Something. And then when we see them, like, in these moments, like, watching that Faces of Death, or Ralphie clipping his toenails and hitting her in the face.
With his shrapnel.
And she's reading a book about Satan.
Cool relationship.
It is. I mean, all her relationships are so cool, but we see it in a different way, right? We know that he's a pretty master manipulator too. Yeah. I don't know if he's going to be able to manipulate his way out of telling that joke about Ginny Sacrimoni.
Right. Yeah, so for those of you, if you are watching the show for the first time, there's a pretty throwaway part of the episode. Something you'd probably take the least notice of.
Although it's mentioned twice.
Right. That's true. Yeah. So yeah, with Ralphie coming up with this joke about Ginny Sacrimoni taking a 95-pound mole off her ass, the impact of that is rather severe for such a throwaway scene. Yeah. So that'll continue to come up. That is actually, in a weird way, one of the main plot points of this whole episode.
Yeah.
And actually Janice, like, in terms of manipulation, she actually goes against Tony, and she actually compares him to, she says to him, "You're just like Mom."
Right.
Which is, again, like, she knows how to get under his skin. She's a master manipulator.
She says Ralph is such a great guy, which we've heard said before. So
he is, isn't he?
And then, his sense of style, of course, is excellent. The other one that I have in terms of that is, like, with Chris and Adriana.
Yeah.
Like, he keeps saying things like this to her, like, with all your intelligence, you never see the big picture, right? Like, he's, for some reason, like, he doesn't like that she has this friend. He doesn't, he doesn't know that she's in the FBI, obviously, or, but he does see her as a threat. Yeah. And he doesn't want that in his life. And so, first he's like, she's a dyke. Then he's like, use your head. She's trying to fuck us up. And what we have is stronger than any of that shit, right? Like, after they have that scene where he puts his hand on her leather pants. Yeah. And, like, it's so much, like, because he was the one who did wrong there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's so able to manipulate Adriana and her feelings in that moment that then she does also turn on Danielle, right?
Yeah.
Like she's like, did you try to take his hand off of you? And she's like, I did.
Which is interesting because that actually indicates that she doesn't buy Christopher's story. That she took his hand and put it there. Did he try to take his hand off of you? It's like she actually didn't believe Chris.
Yeah.
But it's still a problem for her.
Yeah.
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 And she did try to take his hand off of her.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. But yeah, just that, like, she's trying to fuck us up. Like, it's so crazy.
Yeah. I think that idea, too, like, something that comes up quite a bit in this episode, and I mentioned it very briefly earlier, is, like, this idea of Christopher being obsessed with thinking of the big picture, but not being able to do it. Like, that's being brought to Chris. Now that Tony has discussed in this season, like, his master plan to bring in Christopher as blood and to pass off operations to him, that's obviously causing some problems with, you know, Patsy Parisi getting passed over.
Yeah.
Likely Silvio also probably feeling a threat as consigliere, that he's probably recognizing what Tony is doing with Chris, which is also probably why he makes the first power play we see him make in the whole show.
Yeah, totally.
But, you know, like, Chris, we really get a sense that he can't think of the big picture. Like, even after Tony's telling him about the fiber optic cable, he's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is like a huge, like, this job is worth like hundreds of millions of dollars. What are you doing stealing this stuff? And then Chris says, I get it. But then even after he says, like, aren't they insured?
Right.
You know, so that, like, kind of like petty street level mentality, he can't really shake it. Like, and he's not ready for the position that he's in.
No, that's for sure.
So, yeah, one can sense that there will be more and more problems there. What else?
I just have a few, like, really throwaway things.
Let's do it.
No, they're really throwaway.
I have one throwaway thing, so we can add it to the pot.
One of them is I really like the website that Carmela is looking at. It's like a very early 2000s website about money.
Yeah. Also, AJ saying, like, are you done on the internet? As if only one of them can use the internet at the same time.
That was what it was like.
Yeah. What's next?
Also, I don't know, I just thought, like, the scene with Furio, I guess it kind of goes back to, like, what we were talking about before with, like, the European thing. But there's this great scene, or I guess two scenes, really. No, it's all in the same scene, where Meadow's friend comes over. She's like, there's a guy with a ponytail in your driveway. What's with that? And then Carmela, like, looks at herself in the mirror and, you know, gets herself ready. And then it's this very dramatic shot of, like, her opening the door. Yeah. And Furio's almost there. Like, you can almost
he's, like,
imagine.
Shining. He's, like, glimmering.
Like, his hair, like, waving in the wind. Like, he kind of even does this kind of, like,
smile.
Head tilt and smile as the door opens.
The lighting, too. It's, like, so bright.
Yeah, and it's very, I don't know, it, like, you know, we were talking about how it's, like, almost like a soap opera, right? Like, we see
well,
this,
and actually, you know, Meadow's friend calls Carmela Mrs. Soap.
Yeah. Which was talked about on Sopranos Autopsy.
That's true. It sure was. Check it out. Always a great source.
Always a great source. But yeah, like, I just like this, like, we have this, like, always, like, they play with your sense of, like, this impending drama, right? Yeah. That's going to happen. And this has been, like, a slow build for this one, but I just thought that was, like, so, I don't know, like, again, a funny David Chase kind of joke. Like, it was, like, this, like, Italian ponytail guy outside the door.
Yeah.
Again, that kind of allure of things that are outside of this world or outside of this country.
Well, also, like that.
And she asks him if she's going to become a citizen.
Right.
And he's like, you don't need that.
Yeah, you don't need that. Like, But it's interesting, too, to think about that. Like, Furio having this, like, he's this ponytail, like, this allure of him, like, in some ways being in touch with, like, femininity or something that none of the other characters have. Like, obviously, none of those other characters could ever have a ponytail. Like, it's just, like, unthinkable.
But maybe Christopher could have wings.
Yeah, he wanted to. Yeah. But, yeah, the fact that Furio is okay with that is probably what, in part, like, what draws Carmela in.
Mm-hmm. No, it's something, even though he's in the mob, it is still this, like, foreign allure or something.
She has a type, too, with Vic Musto earlier, too.
Yeah.
In Furio.
Yeah, no, like, there is
she
this,
likes, like,
there is this European thing.
Soap opera stars.
Yeah.
One thing that I really liked, actually, so when the FBI come to pick up Adriana and she's out with Cosette, and then Cosette's kind of, like, running into the street, and then the car comes and they have that on the same shot, like that, like, impending danger. Like the
no.
fact
Watch
that
out,
like
Cosette.
that like you know the car is coming, like the threat from the FBI.
Yeah.
You know, but the fact that the dog is like kind of like running into traffic. I
Yeah.
thought that was really interesting, and I liked that.
Oh man.
Also, that's it. Those are all my ideas.
I think that's all my ideas too.
Love the episode though. I mean, I think
Yeah.
season 4, I feel like the show just keeps on maturing and they just go deeper and they actually just keep on getting better and better at what they do. It's amazing.
I think last time we watched, this was my favorite season, just so you're aware of that.
Okay. Let's see what happens this time.
Let's see what happens.
So thank you for listening. We love doing this.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon
We just get to talk to each other for 44 minutes
and talk to you about Sopranos.
about our favorite show.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time.